And now I'm going to transition to introducing our keynote speaker, Carey Hamilton. State Representative Carey Hamilton was elected in 2016 to represent Indiana House District 87, where she advocates for environmental conservation, social justice, and more accessible voting. Carey is also Vice President North America for ClimateView, a Swedish climate action technology company that helps cities transform climate planning into progress. Carey leads the North American team, working with communities and partners to advance climate action. Carey has worked in the environmental field for 25 years. Prior to ClimateView, Carey was an environmental NGO executive, consultant, and leader of state and local governmental environmental programs. Carey holds a bachelor's degree from IU, represent, and she has served on a wide range of local and national boards and committees and has received several awards for her legislative and environmental professional leadership. So Carey, I will let you take it away. And as a reminder to our attendees, please drop your questions in the Q&A box off to the right side of the screen. And once Carey shares her screen, you can blow up her slide so that it does take up your full screen so you have a better viewing of that. So Carey, let's take it away.
Thanks so much, Jessica, and congratulations to you and your team for your recognition this past year. I look forward to seeing you in Glasgow next week. I will also be there, so we will have to put our heads together and do some fun social media for our friends back in Indiana. Thanks also to Christina on your team, and then I want to shout out to Stephanie and the McKinney family for your support today and for so much good work leading to more climate action in the state of Indiana. And thanks to all of the sponsors and all of the attendees. As a legislator in the state, this is where I get my energy to go forth and fight for things that are sometimes a big challenge at the State House. And so I'm just really glad to be here today. Also, as Jessica mentioned, I'm an IU grad, and so just my pride at how much high quality work is happening within the IU system to help our state advance climate action. It just makes me feel great. I also have a freshman in Bloomington at SPIA, so all kinds of IU connections and pride right now. I'm going to jump into a presentation, but I want to share that today I'll be wearing two hats. As Jessica introduced me, she shared both my legislative role, and that's how I'm going to start. I'm going to talk about some thoughts around engagement at the State House and why your voice is so important. And then I'll transition and talk about my work with communities to help advance climate action at the local level, a job that's relatively new to me and that fits perfectly with the theme of this conference, which I'm so excited about. So let me jump in here and get going. All right. Okay. So here we are. Here's the Indiana State House, and where I go on and off throughout the year, and for 2 months in a short session year and about 4 months in a long session year to help craft state policy and the state budget. So obviously climate change presents significant opportunities if we were to take action, and significant risks and realities that we're already seeing on the ground because of inaction here and across the globe. Starting out, I'm just going to hit on a couple of those opportunities and a couple of the risks because there are many more, and I don't have time to get to those today, but I want to get you thinking about how at the State House we can have a positive impact if we are to take action. So starting with manufacturing. As you know, I'm sure we're a great manufacturing state here in Indiana. And let me pause and just say, I just remembered, I want to say, if you're not in Indiana, because I know we have attendees from out of the state, please put your state capital in this picture and think about this context in the context of your state. But so for Indiana, we are a great manufacturing state, and we have such an opportunity to be a part of the climate change solution if we employ our manufacturing sector proactively, if we incentivize our sector to transition to building wind turbines and solar panels and all the parts that go into that equipment, and to building electric vehicles We are seeing some movement on this front. We an announcement just a week and a half ago from Stellantis and Kokomo, major investment in electric vehicle battery production happening at a plant there. But there's more we can do. We have 100,000 auto manufacturing jobs in our state, and it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we maintain those jobs into the future because they're good quality jobs, and that we help that industry transition to building electric vehicles, both so that we can make sure we're moving into the future and keeping those jobs and growing those jobs, but also proactively being part of the climate change solution for our state and for our country. And then other opportunities. When we think about migration, Gabe, Professor Filippelli hit on this yesterday. There are both opportunities and risks. When we think about the opportunities around climate migration or climate refugees, as we think about them sometimes in parts of the world right now, depending on the degree of what's motivating that move, if it's chronic or critical. It may be more of a refugee situation, unfortunately, but that is happening on the planet today. So with migration, opportunities arise because we need to bring knowledge workers to our state and different types of workers to our state right now. We need teachers and folks who can work in machine manufacturing and the technology sector. And what will bring them here is a thriving economy and a quality of life that is attractive. And so many of the policies that we think about with climate change build a higher quality of life for our residents. We see demand for trails and bike and pedestrian connectivity, as well as mass transit and other infrastructure that both improves quality of life by providing that diversity of transport, the access to the outdoors with getting around, not having to own a vehicle. But then also the co-benefits of, for example, if we increase transit and increase the use of electric vehicles in both our personal vehicles and commercial transport, we're significantly reducing emissions that happen on roadways that are often alongside marginalized communities. That decision that impacts quality of life also has a very positive public health benefit to those marginalized communities. So we've got to think about the opportunities and utilize those opportunities in our work at the State House to advance proactive policies. And then, of course, risks and challenges we're already seeing when it comes to, we know, thanks to lots of research out of the Purdue Climate Research Center, our friends up at Purdue, that we have increased flooding happening already, and the predictions for increased storm events and heavy rains, as Gabe discussed yesterday, it's upon us. Damaging storms, which leads to threats to our ag sector, dangerous heat. I was in Seattle and Portland this summer during the heat dome, and boy, that really brings home the threats that we're facing around the planet with climate change. It was at times in the afternoon scary to be outside for longer than a few moments, and that's extremely damaging to people and to the economy. And we have to be proactive to reduce carbon emissions while at the same time taking action to build a more resilient state. Climate migration, when it comes to risks, we know that migration can have its positives, but we also know that when too many people come too quickly, it becomes hard for our state to absorb that change. Do we have the services and the housing available for folks if they come at a rate that we're not prepared for? That can be very, very disruptive. So we need to, again, be prepared to address and be proactive in handling these concerns. So here's the Indiana House chamber, and I sit off to the right, and a lot of work happens here. And as you know, I'm sure, for the last many years, it has been hard to make progress on issues related to climate change and renewable energy and wetlands protections and forest protections. But I want to share some thoughts about how to make progress in these areas and why your voice is so important. So first of all, coalitions. I am a huge advocate of coalition building. I want to refer back to this last legislative session. I'm sure many of you know that we had a very disappointing bill, 389, Senate Bill 389, that ultimately became law, that took away what we had in Indiana as some limited state protections for wetlands. Now, the reason I bring that up, both as a concern, of course, very disappointing that happened, but also an opportunity, is because there was a very broad coalition that formed around this issue. And that coalition has continued to coalesce and get more strategic and work together leading up to the next legislative session. And that gives me great hope. So I encourage you, if you care about wetlands protections, which of course is an essential part of resilience when in changing climate, then I encourage you to reach out to stakeholders on that issue and get engaged. Because of that coalescing around this issue and strategy, there will be opportunities to plug in and communicate smartly with elected officials as we near and get into the next legislative session. I also think about the Clean Energy Coalition that came together a couple of years ago in response to a bill that was designed to really kind of bail out the coal industry in Indiana. That bill also passed, but the final version of that bill was significantly weakened thanks to the work of that coalition. And I want to lift up some of the names or entities so you can think about what that kind of coalition would look like. Faith-based entities, youth groups, environmental nonprofits, ratepayer groups, renewables industry, the public health advocates, tech sector came to the table, opposed to a coal bailout. I think about organizations like Vets for Renewables, Veterans for Renewables, and for energy independence. These groups come together and they have a powerful voice all over the state of Indiana. And we can find these coalitions with just about any issue we're working on when it comes to climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. And then I also want to share another concept, and that is, or suggestion. I know this works around the state. I've been part of it myself. When you at the community level, I encourage you all to get to know your legislators. And I'll tell you, when you come together and sit down over coffee with your legislator, bring some folks with you. Bring the local elected official who cares about your issue and maybe has a relationship already with that legislator. Bring a local business owner, again, who shares your concerns or your issues that you're advocating for. And sit down and dialogue respectfully, get to know them, and start that relationship. These conversations matter, and they're very, very important. So I encourage you all to engage in that way. And let's see. I just have 2 slides with some fun pictures. Unfortunately, I'm in all of them because those are the pictures I have. But this is designed to give you a little hope and a little nudge to engage at the State House. First, in 2018, I was thrilled to get a bill through that I authored based on a conversation with constituents in my district. The Monon Trail is right in the heart of my district, and there were some folks who were concerned about providing access to the trail because they were told they would have liability issues. So we removed that liability, built a bipartisan coalition, and got this bill through. And jump ahead, I've heard from developers who have said now it is easier to build trails across the state because of that immunity provision. And in this picture, you see myself sitting with the governor signing the bill, community leaders, the State Chamber of Commerce, the Farm Bureau, Hoosier Environmental Council, and Republican legislators all together working to advance trail access, which of course is a key element of greener transportation infrastructure. Many of us at the State House are fighting for forest protection, and this was just one day 2 years ago when I got up to work on this issue. And we're building a bipartisan coalition around protecting our endangered forest land in Indiana. Again, very much tied to building a more resilient Indiana. I have to share this picture with the climate strike of 2019. These are young people from all over Indiana. I suspect there's some people at the conference today that are in that crowd. If they can show up, you all can show up. So please get plugged in for opportunities to show up at the State House. And then finally, in 2020, kind of not too long before the world closed down, I worked with my friends who I know are participating today at Earth Charter Indiana to launch in pretty quick order, in a few weeks, the first ever Youth Climate Action Day at the State House. And it was very easy, it turned out. Well, I don't know if Jim Poyser would say it was easy, but it seemed pretty easy to get students from all over the state to come to Indiana, to the State House on a school day to express their passion about climate action. We had several impressive student speakers. And I'll tell you, work is underway to create Climate Action Day 2022. So please stay tuned for that, reach out about that. I'm excited to pack the entire State House around climate action in this coming session in 2022. And then finally, just to reiterate, your voice really is important. Regardless of what role you hold, you have a legislator who you can speak with. You're an authority on this issue, coming from an important perspective. And I encourage you to get to know your legislator, reach out, start that dialogue now, so that when you communicate during the legislative session, your legislator knows you and is ready to act on your behalf. Okay, so now I am going to, actually, I don't need to flip out just yet. Here we go. Bear with me, friends. It's right here. We're getting there. Okay, now I'm putting on my other hat in my role with Climate View, where we help cities transform their climate planning into progress. We have an online SaaS platform, software as a solution. And I want to start out by saying, I hope I don't sound like I'm selling this. What I hope to do is encourage everyone who's working on climate planning at the local level to think about how to build the most rigorous and aggressive plans with the best tools. And if you come back and are interested in learning more about Climate View, we'll be glad to talk to you. But this is really about challenging to do the most aggressive planning, because we have to make action happen sooner. I think it was Stephanie earlier who mentioned the Bloomberg report from this summer showing that cities are just not getting to where they need to go. And so we need the best tools and the best plans to start to take action. So I'll be pretty quick through these slides. I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. But what we do is provide a platform to have a living plan, no longer a book or a report in a PDF form, but a living online plan, transparent to your community, that helps you develop the optimal path, the smartest path to making the economic case for your climate transition. We were founded 3 years ago. We're a 3-year-old Swedish tech startup. We're now in 7 countries, 40 plus cities. Cincinnati is our first US city. We're in dialogue with a few others right now. And just very quickly, I love sharing this story about our founder. This is my colleague, Tamer Shalit. And he is a brilliant mathematician who for decades has been working with companies to help them solve complex solutions in their technology systems. And 3 years ago, he said he wanted to use his big brain, he probably didn't say it that way, but I will, to be part of the climate change solution. And he sat down with folks at the Climate Policy Council in Sweden. They had just published what is probably the most aggressive national climate plan on the planet. And he, over the course of a few days or weeks, mapped out this thick book into a 13-foot long poster, and then ultimately translated that onto this platform. And so the country of Sweden was our first funder and client. That's the beginnings of this company. And we've grown throughout Europe and now the United States. So obviously, timing is everything. And right now, communities across the globe are seeing this urgent demand to take action and are struggling with the best way to develop smart plans. This slide could also show fires and heat domes and storms, but you get the point. So communities, whether it's states, regional governments, local governments, nations, need plans with strong accountability that can deliver on as quickly as possible, very transparent to the public, with lots of stakeholder engagement and verifiability around the data and the goals set in those plans. So our platform provides access and guidance on having the best, most up-to-date data, gaining support and input from all of your stakeholders, whether that's internal or external in the community, whether that's industry or community groups, public health advocates, et cetera. And then we work to help ensure the highest quality plan with rigor so that it can be funded. And we're helping to tie communities to the burgeoning sector of green funding in communities across Europe and the United States. So we do this by starting with transition targets that help us make this transition. We want our communities to go from a thriving economy today to a thriving economy based on low or no carbon activities in the future. And so we create these transition targets that cities can pull from to build their plans. It helps break down the complexity into manageable building blocks. And these are called, again, transition elements. So now is when I'm gonna switch as elegantly as I can, which may take a moment. I have to jump out here. Hello, everyone. And then jump back in. Right here. Okay. Is that working? I wonder if that helps here. No. One moment.
We're seeing it, Carey. We can see a website with it looks like a grid of squares on it, if that's what you are looking at.
Thank you. Okay. I want to make sure it was showing up broadly. Thanks, Jessica. So just real quickly, just a couple of the features I want to share. This is how communities demonstrate their very high level plan. So this community, it's a made up community, Climateville. It has these total emissions, and they've set a goal of this amount of reduction by 2030. And so you can break down by sector how they plan to achieve those goals. So for example, this is their increased proportion of commuting by electric bus. And this is the goal they have set. And then you can, over time, see progress towards that goal plotted into the graph. And I am going to go very quickly here because I want to save time, as I mentioned earlier. I'll just do one other. As an industrial state, let's look at different ways to reduce carbon in the industrial sector. This is construction of multifamily residential housing, a goal, and then progress towards that goal. I will share Sweden's Climate Policy Board. I'll jump over there real quick. They have a goal around zero carbon steel. And they just 2 weeks ago, they came up with this plan and have been working with their industry to start to achieve these goals. 2 weeks ago, and I'm not sure exactly where it would fit in here, developed the first batch of carbon-free steel, which is super exciting for me as we live here in one of the highest steel producing states in the United States. So back over here, so this is your overall balancing tool. And I also want to show on this page, I think I need to get back here before I can play around in it. As we scroll down, there are different parts of your plan that are transparent to the public. And this is where you can really show your personalized plan. So if your community has, as part of your climate plan, more access to local food, this is where you would go in and create that element in the plan. And that exists here somewhere. I just don't have it accessible right now. If you have, and I think most cities do, thankfully, have significant elements in their plan around social justice and equity, this is where you really show those connections. And then actually here, I just will, real quick, we'll show this page. Actually, I might not need to do this now. Oh, I know what I wanted to do, the balancing tool. Thanks, friends, for your patience with me. So this is another interactive element that is really powerful when trying to when you're working with stakeholders to demonstrate your plan and to get input on your plan. So in a community, you could say, for example, in Indianapolis, we could decide we want to significantly increase usage of electric cars. So you see over here, that much of an emission reduction has happened. You also see this emission increase, and this is because we know that part of our grid is still carbon-based. So that's reflected here. It's all connected. I'll also just show remote working. If we increase that, if we had a goal to incentivize remote working, that reduces the positive impact here, increases elsewhere, and is all interrelated. So I'll just leave it at that, showing the connectivity of features and the ability of stakeholders to play around in this and determine what their goals might be so that they can weigh in on the planning process and make suggestions that are informed by the carbon benefit of those different transition targets. Okay, so I'm done with this and hop back over here. I'm almost done. I just want to take a moment to, here we go. We did that. And I just want to share, this is a bit of a teaser. On November 16th, we're going to have an announcement. So this is soon after COP, about how we're working to provide more access to communities. And it's our commitment to advancing zero carbon cities, states, regions, and nations across the globe. I'm really excited about this. Stay tuned. If your community is interested in Climate View, this will be important information for you to have. Okay.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Carey. We appreciate you sharing your time with us. We've got quite a few questions in the Q&A section, so I'll go ahead and read those off. As folks, if you have more, please feel free to drop them, or if you want to upvote somebody else's question, if you want to make sure that one gets answered, that's also a good way to show your support for the questions. And we'll just run right up to time here, so as we get done, we will. The first question that has the highest amount of upvotes is, are there any bills we should be aware of as we prepare for the 2022 legislative session?
Ooh, so I haven't filed any bills yet. There are many thoughts in the works, ranging from bringing back net metering for residents and schools and other users so that we can get back to incentivizing renewable energy distributed in communities across our state. I'm working on a circular economy bill related to producer responsibility that will help jumpstart recycling in our state. And I know I have some colleagues also working on some climate bills. I would like to see, I mentioned the Climate Action Day 2 years ago. And the one other thing that happened a few days after that event was the first ever hearing on climate action at the State House was around a resolution I proposed that would have created a climate planning task force, ultimately to develop a plan for the state. Gabe mentioned this yesterday. We need a statewide climate plan. So I will be filing something to help spur that conversation, at least at the State House this year. And I would love to see support for that. I will reach out to colleagues. That won't just be my bill. I'll find some co-authors and work with anyone who wants to support it to try to drum up a hearing for that bill and ultimately votes to get it through.
Great. The next question is, what sustainability arguments resonate at the State House? Is there a way for us to better frame our sustainability goals for our elected leaders there?
Well, economic is top of the list, and we have powerful economic arguments to make. Certainly when it comes to being part of the solution and creating those jobs I talked about earlier, but also being part of the solution and making sure that our current more resilient infrastructure investments actually hold up over time, right? If the climate keeps getting hotter, our current smarter investments today aren't going to have a chance. And we're talking trillions of dollars over time in public infrastructure. But ultimately, making that economic connection is top of the list. And it resonates with all legislators. Certainly, many of us also care about the ultimate, equity and viability. Those of us who are really paying attention to the science, we worry about viability of our climate for our children. But economics plays for everybody.
Great. Our next question is, how do you recommend cities push city-level sustainability supporting policies in a way that avoids state scrutiny or blocking?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's certainly there has been state blocking of efforts. I don't think we can worry about that. I think we need to do our part at the local level. And if you get pushback then from the state, then we need to come together as cities and towns and supporters of action and push back against that. I don't believe we need to fearfully stand back and just say, don't try. Because ultimately we're proposing the smartest decision for communities, and we can make that case.
Yeah, lots of
and let me just add, I think one of the things that might have prompted that was the idea of communities coming forward with proposals to ban new natural gas investments or infrastructure. The stakeholders in opposition to that are not always in alignment on these issues. So we have to keep that in mind. The opposition is becoming fractured, and because the market for renewables is growing significantly. As we all know, renewables are becoming the most cost competitive option. So that's extremely helpful to us as well.
Great. Next question says, it feels like special interests or corporate groups get a hold of our representatives and influence their decision making. How can we do the same?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you one of my biggest frustrations at the State House is the power of special interests. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But I do think, getting back to my idea of different types of coalitions, I think that's how we counterbalance. I have seen, for example, this isn't in the environmental space, but it's a powerful example, where the very powerful predatory lending industry spent a lot of money on campaigns in Indiana and proposed some very excessive interest rates for short-term borrowers in Indiana, to the tune of 30, 40, 50% interest on short. It was pretty crazy. And the coalition that came together to fight that won. They beat back a very powerful stakeholder group. We can do that on all of our environmental issues if we continue to be smart and work together and build our coalitions.
Great. You mentioned this a little bit, but this person might want some more details. Is what are the chances of a state level sustainability plan or climate action plan? It might need to be named something different. So maybe you could speak more to what you might be introducing and what that process might look like so we can be on the lookout for it.
Yeah, well, what I proposed 2 years ago was looking at, we can call it whatever we need to call it. And I don't have a proposal today, but looking at the agriculture sector and how it's impacted and how we can work proactively to help reduce those impacts. Looking at the manufacturing sector and how it can be part of the solution. So right there, we started out with two major parts of our economy and ways to help keep those strong, right? And then building on that, sort of thinking about how we message. It does boil down to economics, and we have the winning economic argument. So a plan for the state, if framed appropriately, is reasonable to expect. I think, we need to, I think some folks have been sitting down with the governor. It would be great to have his support. I don't think the supermajority leans towards supporting something like this, but that doesn't mean we can't get it done with the right, again, strategy and coalition.
Dwight asks, what's the cost of using Climate View?
It depends. And on November 16th, there will be some, I'm not supposed to really say this, but there will be a free part of the platform that's pretty powerful for communities that maybe don't have resources. So for example, creating your inventory and reporting through to CDP. But I'll be able to talk about all of that with communities after November 16th. And I want to shout out to my colleague, Rebecca Tukolsky, who should be on right now, who is also with Climate View and a great Hoosier. So anyway, there we go.
Great. So we will wait a couple weeks to hear that information. Are there any federal changes that are challenging Indiana's general lack of climate action, maybe encouraging or requiring us to act at a state level?
Well, it's hard for the feds to require action at the state level, but there is a lot the feds can do to move us forward. And as Jessica and I will both be at COP next week, and I'm anxious to hear what comes out of that. Even more, maybe before then, even if we get this infrastructure bill through, we'll see what's in there. There will be some action at the federal level that will be good for Indiana. Don't know what that's going to look like yet.
Sure. So maybe time for one or two more. So the next one we have is, are there forms of engagement that are more effective than others, a phone call versus an email? So I'm assuming that means from a representative standpoint.
No, great. I'm glad you asked that because I meant to address that earlier. So it comes down to being personal. So if it's the day of a vote and you want to make sure you're added to a list so that your legislator knows 30 people called in, make a phone call, that's fine, or shoot a generic email. But if you have a little time, especially if you've been able to build a relationship, which I encourage beforehand, or even if not, a personalized message is really key. So often we all get whatever issues we care about that sort of send this letter to your email, you can do that, but you can stop and just take a minute and personalize it and talk about your community, change the subject line, reference your having had coffee the year before or meeting them at a community event. That adds a lot of weight to your communication.
Great. What is the terminology for climate change at the state level? Do most state legislators refer to it as climate change? Do they refer to it as extreme weather?
I think now climate change, I think we've jumped ahead a lot in 2021, and you can say climate change. There will be a few legislators for a while who just don't want to talk about it, but the rest of us, and I mean the majority of both parties, certainly everyone in my party, are fine to talk about climate change.
Okay.
And but it is true for folks who've been around for a while. It was just not that many years ago when a former governor banned the use of the words climate change in any state policy. So it's a valid question.
And maybe one last one here. What are some bipartisan topics that seem to get support? Are there any themes in those?
We do find, despite having backtracked on wetlands this year, there were bipartisan votes on that, opposing that bill. We get bipartisan support for forest protection, bipartisan support for renewable energy. So really a lot of the things that we care about, it's just getting over that hump, right? There is that special interest within the supermajority. So we just need sometimes we just need a very few more votes. And again, that gets back to why everyone participating in this conference, your voice is so important.
Great. Awesome. So I think we're going to stop it there for the folks in the Q&A. We appreciate everyone asking your really thoughtful questions. And Carey, you are free to depart the virtual stage at this point if you would like.